Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football, taking a deep dive into this USC program and doing a little bit of an updated top transfer targets for USC, specifically on the defensive side of the ball. Obviously, Danton Lynn coming in. We're getting a little bit more of a feel of what kind of players, what kind of scheme Danton Lynn wants to run, and what players would be best fit for the Danton Lynn scheme. Really excited to get into this one. We spent majority of our time talking USC football in regards to the transfer portal at the quarterback position, right? Going after guys like Will Howard, Cam Ward, Dylan Gabriel. And at the end of the day, we kind of agree Lincoln Riley is going to get that quarterback situation right. If there's any position we trust Lincoln Riley to get right, it's the quarterback position, the offensive side of the football. For USC to have success year one in the Big Ten, there's got to be significant changes on the defensive side of the ball. That started with Danton Lynn. Now I want to talk about some personnel and players we might see Danton Lynn go after. Really excited to get into this one. Before we do, just want to say thank you to you guys and a shout out, as always, to the USC fans. You guys continue to show just a ton of support, whether we're talking high school recruiting, whether we're talking transfer portal. Cannot thank you guys enough for rocking with the boys and showing all the support you guys do. If you do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. And more importantly, would love to hear your guys' top targets for USC on the defensive side of the ball. Without further ado, let's get into this one. I want to first talk about Danton Lynn and what his defense needs to be successful. And the best quote I've seen from Danton Lynn thus far in his short career, you might say, or tenure with this USC defense is saying, we're going to scheme around our players. Like, the defensive scheme depends on what kind of players we have and what those players do well. And you look at the biggest problem with Alex Grinch and that defensive side of the ball the last 2 years, it was the exact opposite, right? Taking these players on defense and kind of fitting them into a certain hole, pigeonholing them into these certain spots and not really utilizing the strengths of these players, right? Having a guy like a true freshman, Braylon Shelby, in man coverage on Sione Vaki. Like, that shouldn't be part of your defensive scheme. Now, you get Danton Lynn in there, he's going to scheme around the players and look at this roster and say, what do my players do well? And how can we put them in those spots to be successful on the defensive side of the ball? I think that's one of the most underrated aspects of being a coordinator, is looking at your personnel and adjusting your scheme to that personnel. Now, I want to talk about some top targets for USC in the transfer portal, and it starts up front. You look at all the success Danton Lynn had at UCLA. It started in the trenches on the defensive line. They're about to send 3 guys to the NFL draft as edge rushers. You look at the numbers against the run. 2.3 yards per carry. That was top 3 in the country. They only allowed 67 rushing yards per game, also top 3 in the country, and they got after the quarterback, right? When you stop the run successfully, set up those third and longs, and then you can rush the passer, that is the recipe to having a good defense. And you look at what USC just failed to do, and I know a lot of USC fans recognize this. 4.8 yards per carry allowed to opposing running backs. That was 104th outside the top 100. 183 rushing yards per game allowed. That was 115th. I mean, Danton Lynn at UCLA had half of that, less than half of that. My math's right? Almost a third of the rushing yards allowed for USC's defense was what happening at UCLA. So you look at the players Danton Lynn wants to go after. It's going to be on the defensive line. And the first guy I want to talk about is Chris McClellan, transferring from Florida. This is an interesting story, right? 6'3", 320 pounds, the type of bodies you want on your defensive line heading into the Big Ten. And a little background here, Chris McClellan was being recruited by Lincoln Riley and that staff to Oklahoma. He was an Oklahoma native. They haven't offered Chris McClellan yet. He just hit the transfer portal less than 48 hours ago. This would be the kind of body that you want to get into this USC defensive line. And I've been spending a lot of time watching some of these defensive linemen in the portal. Chris McClellan, he's been on my radar before he even entered the transfer portal. He flashed as a true freshman at Florida in 2022. Played a little bit in 2023 as well. Hasn't quite popped, but you see the flashes. You see the ability to be an elite interior defensive lineman. I'm betting on those traits all day. There was a reason he was a top 100 prospect coming out of high school. The development on the defensive line for the Florida Gators has not been great. I view a guy like Chris McClellan as being a guy that could have a breakout third year. And that's normally when you see these defensive linemen kind of break out at the college football level. It is hard to play, especially in the SEC, as an 18, 19-year-old kid. But once you get 20, 21, your body starts developing. That's when Chris McClellan, I think, is going to have his breakout. Should be a massive target for the USC Trojans. Next guy I want to talk about, and this, if you were to ask me, who should be USC's top target in the transfer portal. And I know a lot of people want to say a guy like Walter Nolan, the #1 player in the transfer portal right now. And trust me, I would be jumping for joy if USC was able to land Walter Nolan. That being said, I think the focus of this staff needs to be at getting a well-rounded defensive line. You're not going to stop. You're not going to stop the run with one guy on the inside of the defensive line. You look at the templates for really good defensive lines. Michigan, you look at Georgia, they have 8, 10, 12 guys that they can rotate on the defensive line in and out, keeping bodies fresh. You need to have talent. You need to have depth on that defensive line. So yes, Walter Nolan should be a massive target for USC, but I think USC's focus should be on grabbing a bunch of guys on the defensive line that add a ton of depth, a ton of talent, and you look at that defensive line rotation and say, yeah, we feel good about 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 guys on that defensive line. So the next guy I'm taking a look at, Joey Slackman from the University of Pennsylvania. USC has already offered him. One of my favorite players in the portal. Now, finding Penn film, very hard to do, but from what I've seen from Joey Slackman, he's an absolute animal, especially against the run. This guy's a former wrestler, knows how to play with leverage, take on blocks, eat double teams up, and he's phenomenal at getting off blocks, making plays at or behind the line of scrimmage. Taking a look at some of his numbers. I mean, through 28 games, 25 tackles for a loss. In 2023, he had 26 run stops, tackling the ball carrier within 3 yards of the line of scrimmage. And that's the type of stuff you want to see USC get more of to force those 3rd and longs. And again, Joey Slackman, is it a jump up from that Ivy League to the Big Ten level? Yeah, absolutely. But Joey Slackman's, there's a reason he has 30-plus Power 5 offers coming out of the transfer portal. I mean, he is one of the best interior defensive linemen in the country. And if you're not going to go after Walter Nolan, I mean, you have to prioritize a guy like Joey Slackman. Next guy I want to talk about, and again, not necessarily the flashiest guy out of the transfer portal, but USC doesn't need flash. USC needs guys who can make it happen on the inside and not necessarily stuff the stat sheet, but take on double teams and win at the line of scrimmage. Nate Clifton, he's going into his 5th year of college football, has played 4 years at the SEC level, and this guy knows how to eat up blocks. And he's pretty productive, too. You look at some of the numbers, 7.5 tackles for loss, 5 sacks. What I love most about Nate Clifton is you're getting a guy who's played along the line of scrimmage at the SEC level for multiple years. He's an older guy, so his body is fully developed. 6'5", 280, not necessarily that 300-pound range that we're looking for, but this guy's tough. He takes on blocks, he gets off blocks, and he makes tackles. And those are the kind of things that you need for USC. I wouldn't get so wrapped up in size. And I think I see a lot of people talk, we need 300-plus pounders exclusively. And yes, size absolutely helps along the line of scrimmage. You can be a damn good interior defensive lineman at 280, at 290 if you play physical. If you are able to eat up blocks and win at the point of attack and play with a low pad level, you could see guys who are 330 who play high and are not physical at the point of attack, not play like the 330 pounds. I'm more concerned on what the not what the number on the scale is, but what does it look like when you're playing football? Does it look like you're playing big? Does it look like you're playing bigger than your size? And Nate Clifton, certainly that kind of guy. Next guy I want to go to, and another young cat that I think USC should keep their eye on, is Will Norman, right? He's out of the 2023 class, did not play for the Florida Gators as a true freshman much. He's a guy that another one of those bodies that you're looking for. 6'4", 300-plus pounds. He's from New Jersey, goes down to the Florida Gators, ends up transferring from the program, similar to Chris McClellan. I think Will Norman's another one of those guys where you're looking at him and saying, those are the type of bodies that we want on this USC defensive line. And if you add Will Norman, who, again, from that Northeast, USC now in the Big Ten, like, you can go grab those guys. And we've seen Lincoln Riley go across the country and grab guys like Will Norman. This one would make a lot of sense. And if you're USC, I mean, you're losing a lot of guys along that line of scrimmage. And so what are you selling some of these younger guys? You can come in and play right away if you're good enough. And so Will Norman's a guy that I certainly would be taking a look at. The last guy, and again, on that inside of the defensive line, I think there is a ton of guys that USC can go after. I'm just kind of telling you some of the guys that I've been impressed with the most. LT Overton. And again, not necessarily impressed with what LT Overton has done on the football field at the college level, but more excited about what he can be as he continues to progress in his career. The story with LT Overton, I don't think a ton of people realize, and they kind of want to jump down this kid's throat for not really being that productive his first 2 years of college football. He was originally a 2023 guy, so his body's still kind of coming out of his true freshman year. He ended up reclassifying. He was the #1 prospect in the high school class in 2023. He reclassified to 2022, went to Texas A&M, but another cat that Lincoln Riley, during his time at Oklahoma, was recruiting to Oklahoma. And so there's some connections there. Again, you're looking for these kind of bodies on your defensive line. LT Overton, similar to the story with Chris McClellan, I think has a lot of meat on the bone left in terms of how good he can get. I think LT Overton would make a ton of sense on that inside of that USC defensive line. Now, is this the only position USC is going to be going after in the transfer portal? Absolutely not. They're looking to add talent at all 3 levels of this defense, but I took a look at UCLA and how they win with Dan and Lynn. It started along the line of scrimmage. If Dan and Lynn works at USC, it's because they're dominant along the line of scrimmage. I think that's why Lincoln Riley brought Dan and Lynn in. And so I think there's going to be a high priority of getting guys on that inside of the defensive line who can win, who can stop the run, because that's the recipe of this Dan and Lynn defense. We'll be talking about some edge rushers. We'll be talking about some guys in the secondary as well as more guys hit the portal, but wanted to highlight some of my favorite on the inside of that defensive line. Again, USC fans, appreciate you guys always rocking with the boys. The support's so consistent. It's so amazing. Love talking this program. We'll be covering all the roster moves the USC Trojans make, so appreciate y'all rocking with us, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.